Hi, Shami here. I just attended a session held by the Alberta Real Estate Association. And if you don't know already, there's new residential purchase contracts coming out, and there's three kinds. There's the regular residential one we usually use for single family. There's going to be one for condominiums, and also the one for country residential is also being updated. So why all the changes? Well, there's a whole bunch of issues with the old contracts, and they've been compiling a list of all the different challenges and issues with the old purchase contract. And it's been about 10 years since they had a major overhaul. And as you'll see in a few minutes, this is a major overhaul. Some of the specific requests and challenges that they dealt with in this update is getting rid of the inspection schedule, cleaning up the deposit clauses, changing to more of a plain language contract so it's easier for everyone to read. Ever since those buyer representation agreements came out last year, there's been some inconsistencies between the two documents. And like I already mentioned, some confusing language and mistakes on breakdowns of deposits, mortgage amount, and cash to close that was regularly occurring on the first page of the old contract. So that's been now resolved as well. And they've changed the order of some of these sections so it's a little bit more logical, and they've actually combined a number of sections as well into one section. So let's get started and take a look at the new residential purchase contract. So first of all, under section 2, well, you'll notice it's way smaller. They got rid of that entire section I was talking about for that goes into deposits, cash to close, seller financing, the amount of the mortgage, and then the purchase price. Now all you've got in section 2 are the two big, most important things that most of our buyers and sellers are concerned about is the purchase price and the closing date. So you'll find that now combined in section 2. So section 3 goes into the general terms of the contract. This includes definitions such as what's a business day, we're dealing in Alberta time, legal jurisdiction of Alberta, all that kind of stuff. But it also goes into deeper into the seller's representations regarding RPR and material latent defects as well. What you'll also find as I scroll down here is that new clause that came out earlier this year with the consolidation of all the rules between the real estate boards across the province is item M is the that new conveyancing clause that stipulates which brokerage is going to be doing the conveyancing, and that's all consolidated and put into section 3. And one last thing I also need to mention is it also cleans up the language in regards to material latent defects and what is a material latent defect. RECA's definition is quite vague, and it's hard to nail down a clear definition of material latent defects. So what they've come up with is something that will affect the use or the value of the property. So they've made it a little bit more specific there. Moving on to deposits. This is where they've moved the deposits. And there's going to be a little bit more information required by you guys to fill out section 4, which is the deposits. So 4.2, it basically states who's going to hold the deposit. And in normal practice, it's the listing brokerage. So you would name the listing brokerage there. 4.3, the buyer's going to pay a deposit of X amount of dollars. That'll form part of the purchase price to the trustee, which is the listing brokerage in most cases, by check, money order, bank draft, whatever you want to put in there, on or before whatever date. A little bit more specific now. The buyer will pay an additional deposit. Again, in many cases, we're using additional deposits when we're dealing with condition removal and making the bulk of the deposit due and payable at that time. And again, just like the initial deposit, the wording is similar there. There's also more specific wording here as far as recourse for the seller if the buyer doesn't provide the deposit. In the past, if the buyer hadn't submitted the deposit on time, in some interpretations of the contract was void at that time. But there wasn't any action in there for the seller to take to make that definitive. Well, under the new contract, this is now more definitive as far as what the seller can do. So the seller just needs to provide notice to the buyer that, hey, we haven't received your deposit. It was due on such and such a date, and we are now moving forward with other offers, and your offer is now void. So it clears that language up, and it also clears up language again regarding disbursements of the deposit if the to either the buyer and seller throughout various different scenarios, and that's what 4.8 deals with in this contract. 5.0, which is land title clause here, just they did some tweaking there, nothing too serious. And under 6.0, representations and warranties, I guess the biggest thing to note here is that as far as any issues with the property, under G, you'll see here any known government and local authority notices regarding the property and known lack of permits. So you must know of the notices and know of any lack of permits, and those must be disclosed. You can't disclose something that you don't know. 7, dower consent. So here's another big change that's come down the pipeline. We already know that if dower is involved, we're on the listing side. So if dower is involved, we're going to get a dower release at the time of the listing agreement. Well, we also know that there needs to be a dower release done at the time of purchase contract. And many of you have been waiting, days, if not weeks, after the purchase contract is signed to get the second dower release done for the purchase contract. Well, under 7.1b, the dower consent for the purchase contract is now going to form part of this contract, and it actually states when the buyer's side can expect it. So if I'm writing an offer today, well, 3 days from now or 4 days from now, that's going to be due. And again, if the buyer doesn't get it, the buyer has every right to walk away from this deal by serving notice. And that's what 7.1b talks about. Under conditions, buyer's conditions, you'll notice the financing condition has been cleaned up. In the old contract, under Section 2, you used to put down exactly how much the new financing was, or you'd put as required or to be determined. This has now gotten rid of that. And this contract is subject to the buyer securing new financing not to exceed blank percent. So if your client's going to be putting 10% down or 5% down or 30% down, that using a percentage number there now will allow that dollar value to fluctuate as the offer gets negotiated. The other thing you're going to notice here under conditions is that there is no fixed time for condition removal. So one of the things we're going to have to start adding is what time, and more importantly, keeping track of what time are the conditions are going to be due. Many agents are going to maybe keep the 9 p.m. deadline in place, but in commercial real estate, many of those conditions come off at 5 o'clock. So this is going to be another negotiating point and point of clarification is what time are the conditions going to be coming off. You'll notice under the property schedule, any option for a property inspection schedule is gone. Many real estate boards were not advising its members to use the property inspection schedule, so now that property inspection schedule has disappeared. Sale of buyer's property. You'll also notice that there's no check boxes here for you to put down if there's any schedules. We're going to be covering that off in 9.1 in a moment. And then here you've got room for additional buyer conditions and seller conditions. 9.1, the selected documents are attached to and form part of this contract. This will go into this is just a simple checkbox of what's included. Not a yes or a no question, but more so if you check it, then it's attached type of a process. And then you would put other terms to the contract under 9.2. Section 10 It's a good sized section. However, none of it really applies to us. This is basically the closing protocol between lawyers and what would happen at the time of closing it or delay of closing. I believe the Law Society had plenty of input on Section 10, so the lawyers should be happy with this. Section 11, insurance is still there. 12, again, remedies. What are some of the remedies if somebody fails to close the deal, both the buyer and seller? 13, notices and documents. What notices need to be given and how. They could be done by fax or email. Now, you got to remember that if you're receiving a notice, either the purchase contract or a condition removal, it's the fact that it was delivered. It doesn't mean it's not based on you actually reading it. So remember that. Other than that, authorization section 14 goes over who's representing who's representing the seller, who's representing the buyer. And if they're not being represented by a brokerage, then by whom is 14.2. 15 is a confirmation of the contract terms. Basically states that everything in agreement is written in this agreement, in this contract. There's nothing verbal or written collateral or side agreements in place. So what you see is what you get. And now there's a place for the buyer and seller to initial and accept that. That was a clause that the lawyers definitely wanted to have in there, and they added that section 15. Section 17 is still quite similar to what was before. What they've added, though, is separate signed and dated outlines for each buyer and also for each seller, because they don't always sign at the same time. Buyers might be in different cities, or you as a realtor might be meeting your clients at 2 different times. E-signatures is another good reason where the different times come in. And the other thing is, for witness signatures, you got witness name just to the right of that. Now, according to the Dower rules, what would happen if there's the seller and spouse of the seller involved in a Dower release scenario? Well, the acceptance would be done by the spouse that's on title. However, the spouse not on title would be signing in this new section, non-owner spouse signature when Dower rights apply, as you can see right here. Something else that they've added to this contract is the rejection section. If your buyer or seller is going to reject this offer, or if there's multiple offers involved, then this is a great spot to fill out a rejection. So if you're the seller and you receive 3 offers, you may want to reject the offers in writing to the other 2 parties by signing and dating this section. Conveyancing information, just who the sellers are, the buyers are, and their lawyers. That information has been copied over. Other than that, there's a couple of schedules that have been pulled out. There used to be old property schedule, which had a section on there for mobile homes and another section on the same schedule for tenancy agreements. They've actually created 2 separate schedules now, one for tenancy and one for mobile homes. So make sure you use the tenancy schedule if you've ever got any tenants involved in any of your purchase contracts or properties that are for sale and are being transferred with the sale of the property. As always, if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to reach out. I'm always here to help you. Thanks, and have a great day.